Thomas Rivera adjusted his guitar strap as he walked through the evening streets, his 8-year-old son Lucas skipping beside him with unbridled excitement. The boy had been talking about this dinner for the past 2 weeks, and Thomas had promised him they would celebrate his birthday at a real restaurant, not with leftover pizza or instant noodles like most nights. The Riverside Bistro stood before them with its warm amber lighting spilling onto the sidewalk. It was not fancy by most standards, but to Thomas and Lucas it might as well have been a palace. Thomas had walked past this place countless times while performing on street corners, watching families through the windows and imagining what it would be like to sit inside with his son, to feel normal for just one evening. Lucas pressed his nose against the glass door. His breath created small fog circles that quickly disappeared. His eyes were wide with wonder as he took in the white tablecloths, the soft music playing through speakers, and the waiters moving gracefully between tables. "This is really happening," Lucas whispered, looking up at his father with pure joy. Thomas felt his heart swell and ache simultaneously. He had checked his bank balance 17 times that afternoon, each time confirming he had exactly $78 available. He had calculated the cost of 2 meals, drinks, and even a slice of birthday cake. It would be tight, leaving him with only a few dollars until his next street performance earnings came in, but it would be worth it to see Lucas smile like this. Host greeted them at the entrance with a polite but assessing gaze. Thomas became acutely aware of his worn jacket and faded jeans. He had done his best to look presentable, combing his hair back and wearing his cleanest shirt, but he knew they stood out among the other diners in their business casual attire. "Table for 2, Thomas said, keeping his voice steady and confident. The host nodded and led them to a small table near the back, close to the kitchen doors. Thomas noticed they were being seated in the least desirable spot, but he said nothing. At least they were inside. Lucas could barely contain himself as he studied the menu. His fingers traced over the words he was still learning to read. Thomas helped him sound out the options, and together they decided on grilled chicken with vegetables for Lucas and a pasta dish for Thomas. They splurged on lemonade instead of water, and when the waiter asked about dessert, Thomas assured him they would definitely want the chocolate cake afterward. The meal arrived, and Thomas watched Lucas eat with such careful appreciation that it brought a lump to his throat. His son made each bite last, savoring the experience rather than rushing through it like he usually did at home. Between mouthfuls, Lucas talked about school, about his friend Miguel who had moved away last month, about the stray cat that sometimes visited their apartment building. Thomas listened and smiled, pushing his own food around his plate. He had learned to eat less so Lucas could have more, a habit formed over the past 3 years since his wife Rebecca had left them for a life she said was more promising. She sent cards on holidays now, always with the same excuse about why she could not visit or contribute financially. The chocolate cake arrived with a single candle flickering in the dim light. The waiter and a few nearby diners joined in singing Happy Birthday, and Lucas's face lit up brighter than Thomas had seen in months. The boy closed his eyes, made a wish with such serious concentration that Thomas wondered what hopes lived in that young heart, and blew out the candle in one breath. As they finished the last crumbs of cake, the waiter appeared with the check. Thomas pulled out his debit card, the plastic worn at the edges from years of use. He had checked the balance one final time in the restroom. Everything should be fine. The waiter took the card and disappeared. Thomas and Lucas continued chatting, the boy recounting every detail of his favorite parts of the meal. Minutes passed. Thomas began to feel uneasy. The waiter returned, but his expression had changed from professional neutrality to something colder. "Sir, your card has been declined." He said the words quietly, but not quietly enough. A woman at the next table glanced over. Thomas felt ice water flood his veins. "That cannot be right. Can you try it again, please?" The waiter sighed, clearly having dealt with this situation before. He disappeared once more. Thomas pulled out his phone with shaking hands and opened his banking app. His stomach dropped. There was an automatic charge he had forgotten about, the emergency car repair from last week. The mechanic had said he would run the charge today. The $78 had become $11.36. Lucas sensed something was wrong. His smile faded. "Dad, is everything okay?" Before Thomas could answer, a new presence approached their table. Mr. Gerald Foster, the restaurant manager, arrived with quick, purposeful strides. He was a stout man in his early 50s with a thin mustache and an expression that suggested this interruption was the last thing he needed on a busy evening. "Is there a problem here?" Foster said, though his tone indicated he already knew the answer. "My card is not going through," Thomas explained, keeping his voice low and steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "There must be some kind of error with my bank. I can call them right now and sort this out." Foster crossed his arms. "Sir, this is a restaurant, not a charity. If you cannot pay for your meal, that is a serious matter. We have policies about this sort of thing." "I understand," Thomas said, feeling heat rise to his face. Lucas had gone very quiet beside him, his small hands folded in his lap. Thomas could see the joy draining from his son's eyes, being replaced with something much worse: shame. "I can come back tomorrow morning with cash," Thomas offered. "I have money, just not accessible right now. I perform music on 5th Street, and I can earn enough by tomorrow afternoon." "Music on the street," Foster repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "So you are a beggar who decided to pretend he could afford a real meal." The words hit Thomas like physical blows. Several diners had stopped their conversations to watch. A couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. Thomas saw Lucas's eyes beginning to water, and that was worse than any humiliation he could endure himself. "Please," Thomas said, abandoning his pride. "It is my son's birthday. I planned this carefully. There was just an unexpected charge. I can pay you back. I give you my word." "Your word," Foster scoffed. "I think we both know what that is worth." He turned to the waiter. "Call the police. We have someone dining and dashing." "No." Thomas stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Please do not do that. I will figure something out. I can leave my guitar as collateral. It is worth $300. I will come back with the money tomorrow." Lucas was crying now, silent tears rolling down his cheeks as he stared at his half-eaten cake. Other diners were openly staring. Thomas felt smaller than he ever had, even smaller than the day Rebecca had packed her bags and told him he would never amount to anything. A clear, calm voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Excuse me, but I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice. A woman in her mid-40s stood from a table across the room. She was elegant in a way that seemed effortless, wearing a navy blazer and carrying herself with quiet authority. Her expression was kind but firm as she approached. "Victoria Lane," she said, extending her hand first to Thomas and then ruffling Lucas's hair gently. "I could not help but overhear. And I think perhaps we can resolve this situation in a way that does not involve police or collateral." Thomas stared at her, confused and wary. Foster had also fallen silent, though his expression remained skeptical. "You see?" Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly but not loudly. "Today is about celebrating this young man's birthday, and I believe everyone deserves to celebrate their special day without tears or trouble." She turned to Foster with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I would like to cover their bill, and perhaps you could bring another slice of that chocolate cake. This one seems to have been interrupted." Foster's skeptical expression shifted to something resembling respect, though reluctance still lingered in his eyes. He nodded curtly at Victoria and turned to instruct the waiter to process her payment. Thomas stood frozen, torn between gratitude and the deep-rooted pride that had kept him going through 3 years of struggle. "I cannot accept this," Thomas began, but Victoria held up a gentle hand. "You can, and you will," she said softly. "Not for yourself, but for him." She gestured toward Lucas, who was watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes, his tears still wet on his cheeks. Today is his birthday, and no child should remember their special day as the night their father was threatened with arrest. Thomas swallowed hard. The logic was undeniable, even if it stung his pride. He nodded slowly, then looked at his son. "Lucas, what do you say to this kind lady?" "Thank you," Lucas whispered, his voice small but sincere. Victoria smiled warmly at the boy. "You are very welcome. Now, how about that second piece of cake? And this time, you get to enjoy it properly." She pulled out her wallet and handed a credit card to the hovering waiter. "Also, please bring the check for my meal as well. I think we are all ready to leave this establishment." The emphasis on the final word was subtle but unmistakable. Foster's face reddened slightly, but he said nothing. The transaction was completed quickly, and soon Thomas found himself standing outside the restaurant with Lucas's hand in his and Victoria beside them in the cooling evening air. "Thank you again," Thomas said, finally finding his voice. "I do not know how to repay this kindness. If you give me your contact information, I promise I will pay you back every cent." Victoria waved away the suggestion. "Consider it a birthday gift. But I do have a proposal, if you are willing to hear it." She glanced at her watch. "I was dining, alone tonight, which is a rare occurrence for me. If you and Lucas are not in a rush to get home, I would love to invite you both for coffee and conversation. There is a lovely cafe just 2 blocks from here." Thomas hesitated. Lucas tugged at his sleeve. "Can we, Dad? Please." Something in Victoria's eyes reminded Thomas of his own mother, who had passed away 5 years ago. There was genuine warmth there, not pity. He made a decision based more on instinct than logic. "We would like that," he said. The Cafe Victoria led them to was a different world from the Riverside Bistro. It was cozy rather than formal, with mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. They settled into a corner booth with cushioned seats. Victoria ordered hot chocolate for Lucas and coffee for herself and Thomas. "So," Victoria began once they were settled, "you mentioned you perform music on 5th Street. What instrument do you play?" "Guitar," Thomas answered. "I play 6 days a week, usually from noon until evening. Whatever people are willing to pay." He paused, then added with a trace of defiance, "It is honest work." "I have no doubt it is," Victoria said, her tone carrying no judgment. "Have you been doing this long?" 3 years, Thomas said. He found himself wanting to explain, to make her understand he was not always a street performer. "I used to work as a session musician for a small recording studio. Nothing glamorous, but it was steady work. When my wife left, she took half our savings and I had to move into a smaller apartment. The studio closed down 6 months later when the owner retired. I tried to find similar work, but the industry is competitive and I needed flexible hours to be there for Lucas. Street performing lets me do that." Lucas had been quietly sipping his hot chocolate, but now he spoke up. "My dad is really good. People always stop to listen. Sometimes they record him on their phones." Victoria's expression softened further. "I would love to hear you play sometime. Do you write your own music? Or do you mainly perform covers?" "Both," Thomas admitted. "I have about 30 original songs. Most of them are about life, family, getting through hard times, but covers pay better. People like to hear songs they know." Victoria leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly genuine. "Thomas, I am going to be direct with you because I sense you appreciate honesty. I own a company called Lane Hospitality Group. We operate 12 boutique hotels, and event venues across the state. Our flagship property, the Grandview Hotel downtown, has been looking for a resident musician for our lobby lounge and private events. Thomas felt his heart skip. He had walked past the Grandview countless times. It was one of the most prestigious hotels in the city, a place where politicians and celebrities stayed. "We have been interviewing candidates for 3 months," Victoria continued, "but no one has felt right. They have the technical skills, certainly, but they lack something harder to define. Authenticity, perhaps, the ability to make people feel something real." She paused, studying Thomas's face. "I have a strong intuition about people. It has served me well in business, and my intuition tells me you might be exactly what we need." Thomas's mind raced. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like him. "I appreciate the thought, but I do not have any formal training. No degree in music. I never went to college at all." "Neither did I," Victoria said with a slight smile. "I started cleaning hotel rooms when I was 19, worked my way up to front desk, then management, then purchased my first small property with a business partner when I was 30. That was 15 years ago. Education matters, but so does hunger, resilience, and raw talent." "I still do not understand," Thomas said carefully. "You heard me talk about street performing, but you have never actually heard me play. This seems like a big decision to make based on intuition alone." "You are right," Victoria acknowledged, "which is why I am not offering you the job tonight." "What I am offering is an audition. Come to the Grandview this Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. Bring your guitar. Play for me and my events director. If we like what we hear, we will discuss terms. If not, you have lost nothing but an hour of your time." Thomas looked at Lucas, who was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. His son's earlier tears were completely forgotten now, replaced with hope that Thomas found both thrilling and terrifying. "What would the job entail?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him details. She had clearly already looked up. 3 evening shifts per week in the lobby lounge, 4 hours per shift. Additional opportunities to perform at private events, weddings, corporate functions, which would be separate contracts with higher pay. The base salary would be $3,800 per month, plus tips and event bonuses. Thomas's breath caught. That was more than he made in 3 months of street performing. It was the kind of income that would mean Lucas could have new shoes when he needed them, not when the old ones literally fell apart. It meant they could move to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. It meant stability, something they had, not known in years. But doubt crept in, cold and familiar. "This is too generous. Why would you do this for a stranger? This feels like charity, dressed up as opportunity." Victoria's expression became more serious. She set down her coffee cup and met his eyes directly. "Thomas, let me tell you something about my philosophy. When I was 23, I was a single mother working 2 jobs and barely making rent. One day, I served breakfast to a businessman staying at the hotel where I worked. We started talking, and I mentioned I had ideas about how hotels could improve their guest experience. Most people would have nodded politely and forgotten the conversation. He listened, really listened. Then he introduced me to someone who became my business mentor and eventual partner." She paused, her gaze distant for a moment as she remembered. "That man did not help me because he pitied me. He helped me because he recognized potential and understood. That talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. He invested in my ability, not my circumstances, and he told me that the best way to honor that investment was to do the same for others when I had the means." Victoria's attention returned fully to Thomas. "I am not offering you charity. I am offering you a job that my business needs filled by someone with talent. Yes, I am giving you a chance you might not have gotten through traditional channels, but if you cannot perform at the level we need, the audition will make that clear. Fair enough." Thomas felt something loosening in his chest, a knot of shame and resistance he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there. He thought about his guitar, about the songs he poured his heart into on street corners, about the dreams he had set aside to survive day by day. "Saturday at 2, he said, his voice firm now. "I will be there, and I will show you what I can do." "Excellent," Victoria said, her smile returning. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "My personal number is on there. Call me if anything comes up. Otherwise, I will see you Saturday." She stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Thomas, bring Lucas if you need to. The Grandview has a wonderful play area for children. He can be comfortable there while you audition." As Victoria walked away, disappearing, into the evening crowd outside the cafe window, Lucas grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, this is the best birthday ever. Even better than the cake." Thomas pulled his son close, feeling tears prick at his eyes but refusing to let them fall. He looked at the business card in his hand, at the elegant logo of Lane Hospitality Group embossed in gold. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to feel something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. 3 months had passed since that evening at the cafe, and Thomas could hardly recognize his own life. The audition at the Grandview Hotel had gone better than he dared imagine. He played 4 of his original songs and 2 carefully chosen covers, pouring every ounce of emotion and skill into each note. Victoria and her events director, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, had hired him on the spot. Now, as Thomas arranged his music sheets on the piano in the hotel's grand ballroom, he still felt moments of disbelief. The lobby lounge performances had become the highlight of many guests' stays. People requested his original songs by name. He had recorded a small album that the hotel sold in their gift shop, with proceeds split between him and the hotel's charity foundation. Lucas was thriving in a new school, one with art programs and field trips, and teachers who actually had time to nurture curious minds. They had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where Lucas could ride his bike safely. Thomas had bought his son new clothes, not from thrift stores but from actual stores where items still had tags. Small luxuries that most people took for granted felt like miracles to them. A full refrigerator, heat that worked properly, walls without cracks or water stains. Tonight was special, though. Victoria had organized the Grandview's annual charity gala, an event that raised funds for families experiencing homelessness. Thomas had been asked to perform during the cocktail hour and again during dinner. The ballroom was transformed into an elegant space with crystal chandeliers, white orchids on every table, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Thomas wore a suit that Victoria had insisted the hotel provide as part of his performance wardrobe. It fit perfectly, made him feel like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Lucas was at home with their neighbor, Mrs. Park, a retired teacher who had become like a grandmother to the boy. Thomas had promised to bring him a slice of the fancy dessert. The guests began arriving, men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. Thomas recognized local business leaders, politicians, even a news anchor he had seen on television. He took his place at the piano, his guitar resting nearby for later, and began to play. His fingers moved across the keys with confidence born from countless hours of practice and performance. As he played, Thomas watched Victoria work the room. She moved from group to group with practiced grace, making everyone feel important, sharing stories about the families the charity had helped. She had told Thomas once that she never forgot where she came from, and events like this were her way of building bridges between those who had resources and those who desperately needed them. Halfway through the cocktail hour, Thomas noticed a commotion near the entrance. A man in an ill-fitting suit was speaking urgently with one of the hotel staff. Something about the man's posture seemed familiar. Thomas continued playing, but his attention was divided. Then the man turned, and Thomas recognized him immediately. Gerald Foster, the restaurant manager who had humiliated him 3 months ago, stood in the doorway looking desperate and diminished. His face had aged, deep lines of stress carved around his mouth and eyes. His suit was outdated and worn at the elbows. Thomas's fingers stumbled on the keys, creating a discordant note that made a few nearby guests glance over. He recovered quickly, finishing the song and transitioning smoothly into the next piece. But his mind was racing. What was Foster doing here? During a brief break, Thomas approached Victoria. She was speaking with a donor, but noticed him immediately and excused herself. "Everything all right, Thomas?" she asked, reading the tension in his face. The man who just arrived, the one being turned away at the door. "That is Gerald Foster. He was the manager at the Riverside Bistro, the one who called the police on Lucas's birthday." Victoria's expression shifted from concern to understanding. She glanced toward the entrance where Foster was now being escorted out by security. "Would you like me to have him removed from the property entirely?" Thomas opened his mouth to say yes, to enjoy the poetic justice of Foster being turned away from a place where Thomas now belonged. But something stopped him. He thought about Lucas, about the lessons he tried to teach his son, about the kindness Victoria had shown him when she had no reason to, about second chances. "Actually," Thomas said slowly, "could you find out why he is here?" Victoria studied his face for a moment, then nodded. She walked toward the entrance and spoke quietly with the security guard. After a brief conversation with Foster, she returned to Thomas. "He came looking for work," Victoria explained. "He was fired from the Riverside Bistro 2 months ago. Apparently, there were multiple complaints about his treatment of customers. He heard we were hiring for hospitality positions and came hoping to submit an application, even though tonight is obviously not the appropriate time." Thomas felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of him felt vindicated. Foster had lost his job because of the very behavior he had displayed that night. But Thomas also recognized the desperation in Foster's appearance, the same desperation he himself had felt not so long ago. "Can I speak with him?" Thomas asked. Victoria looked surprised, but nodded. "I will have security bring him to the staff corridor. Take your time. I can have Patricia play background music for a few minutes." Thomas found Foster in the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards. When Foster saw him, recognition dawned slowly, followed by what appeared to be genuine shame. "I remember you," Foster said quietly, "the street musician with the sun. His birthday." He paused, swallowing hard. "I treated you terribly. I have no excuse for that." "No, you did not have an excuse," Thomas agreed. His voice was calm, not angry. "You humiliated me in front of my son on his birthday. You called me a beggar. You threatened to have me arrested for trying to celebrate with my child." Foster's shoulders sagged. "I know. I have thought about that night many times since I lost my job. I was angry at my own life, my own failures, and I took it out on you. It was cruel and unprofessional. When I heard you worked here now, I almost did not come. But I am desperate. And I thought maybe I could at least apologize if I saw you." Thomas stood silent for a long moment, remembering the fear in Lucas's eyes that night, the tears on his son's cheeks. But he also remembered Victoria's words about recognizing potential and offering opportunity, about honoring kindness by extending it forward. "I cannot hire you," Thomas said finally. "That is not my decision to make. But I can do something else." He pulled out one of his business cards, something he still marveled at having. "Tomorrow morning, call this number. It is for an organization that helps people find employment and get back on their feet. They helped a friend of mine last year. Tell them Thomas Rivera referred you." Foster stared at the card, then at Thomas, his eyes glistening. "Why would you help me after what I did?" "Because someone helped me when they did not have to," Thomas said simply. "And because my son is watching how I live my life even when he is not in the room. I want him to learn that we can choose kindness even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. He turned to walk away, then paused. Mr. Foster, if you do get back on your feet, remember this feeling. Remember what it is like to need help. And when you see someone else struggling, be the person you needed that night, not the person you were. Thomas returned to the ballroom, where the gala was in full swing. Victoria caught his eye from across the room and smiled, a question in her expression. He nodded once, and she nodded back, understanding passing between them without words. As Thomas returned to the piano, beginning a new song he had written about second chances and unexpected grace, he looked out at the sea of elegant guests. But in his mind, he saw Lucas's face, bright with joy and hope. He thought about the long road they had traveled, from that humiliating night to this moment of dignity and purpose. The music flowed from his fingers, each note a testament to resilience, to the power of one person's kindness to transform another's life, and to the choice everyone has to either perpetuate pain or break the cycle with compassion. In the back of the ballroom, Victoria raised her glass in a subtle toast toward Thomas. He smiled and continued playing, his heart full of gratitude, and the profound understanding that the best way to honor a gift is to become a gift to others.